All right, thank you for having me. It's exciting to talk to data enthusiasts always in any venue. So I'm going to talk about several different issues and kind of focus in on particularly contentious issues in how do you build and structure data teams. And so the first thing that I want to get to with that is, there we go, okay, there. But why? Why is this important? So, if you're working in management related to data, then the connection to this is kind of obvious. You have to think about how you're going to structure a team. So if you're going to be a line manager for a team, you have to think about the way that you're going to hire the right people, the way that you're going to build the right relationships with other parts of the organization to make sure that you're actually having an impact. If you're in a more senior level position, then you have to think about whole groups of teams and how they're all going to both work with each other and how you're going to execute on an overall data strategy that's going to provide maximum value for your company. So if you're not in management, if you're an individual contributor, if you're a data scientist, if you're an engineer working on data applications, the reason why this is relevant is actually this topic has more to do with your day-to-day happiness in your job probably than just about anything else. So things that can come up a lot of times are, for example, you'll have gone to school for a long time to develop a lot of specialized training, and then you find yourself in a job where you're doing a lot of like very basic SQL queries over and over for the sales team or something like that, and you feel like, okay, well, why did they hire me and bring me in here if this is what I'm going to do all day? And there's all kinds of other problems that can come up like that, and usually the problem is because the team isn't set up in the right way, or you haven't established the right working procedures or relationships with other parts of the organization. So those are some of the things that I'm going to zero in on here. So to break down overall, there's three kinds of teams that you typically find in data. And so I'm going to briefly talk about what each one of them is, and then I'm going to go into some different structural issues with teams, and I'll address each of those three with each of those issues. So data infrastructure and tools is the first one. So this is called a lot of different things depending on the exact team and the company. So sometimes it's called business intelligence, sometimes it's called data engineering. In Schibsted, it's called data platform. But this is the capability to collect all the data that you need, hopefully in one place, and process that data. So if you need to enable other teams to set up batch processing pipelines, if you need to enable data scientists to run ad hoc MapReduce jobs or to schedule MapReduce jobs, if you need even real-time data streams or anything like that. So there should be one team that's providing all the technology for that kind of thing. So that's data infrastructure and tools. The second one is insights. So insights is the one that usually has, just to preview some of the things I'll be talking about in a few minutes, insights is the area that ends up being the most contentious in my experience. So working in different companies and talking to people that are working in data organizations in different companies, there's usually a lot of angst or confusion or indecision about how to properly set up insights. So what is insights? So this is where you're studying the product and you're trying to understand the product or the business by studying the data. So you want to understand user behavior. You want to understand, so if you're in the context of like a consumer app, so you're going to care about things like, ultimately what you care about is how much money you're making because it's a business. So important contributing factors to that might be the revenue you can make per user or the number of active users. And so you want to understand for each of those things, okay, what are the main drivers of revenue per user? What are the main drivers of the active user counts? How do you get users to stay in the product longer? How do you get new users in particular to stay? How do you keep users from leaving? And all of these questions you have to investigate and understand if you're actually going to get a handle on how to drive these metrics forward as an organization. So that's the job of insights. And then the third one is data products and data features. So what I mean by that is a product or feature that both depends on data and has some kind of machine learning or artificial intelligence component to it, or a statistical model. So there's some kind of quantitative modeling that is involved in bringing this feature about, and it's a production service that is either user-facing or it's used internally in some kind of production capacity where it has to have good uptime and things, all those good things. So those are the three kinds of teams. Now let's talk about the structural issues. So the first one is usually the most contentious one. This is, should the team be central? Should it be one central team that does this thing for everybody in the company? Or should it be distributed? Should there be several of these teams? Or should it be that this particular function is embedded in a bunch of different teams? The reason why this is contentious, I think, is because you can't help but get into politics and like who owns what and things like that. And that's going to naturally, in any kind of human organization, that's going to be a contentious thing. So I find that it's helpful to have a principled framework for thinking about the centralized versus distributed thing, because it helps kind of sidestep the political aspects of it and kind of get to, okay, how do we structure things so that we're providing the most value? So let's run through each of the kinds of teams and see what kind of frameworks make sense. So for a data infrastructure team, I think it's, for those of us who work with data, I think there's a lot of obvious reasons why you would want a single team working on the infrastructure and tooling that people are going to use to process data and to access data and to generate dashboards and things like that. The reason being, if you have multiple teams doing it, it seems like there's no way that could happen, but you're having duplication of effort. And B, you want one place to go to get all of your data. So if there's tremendous value in having all of the data collected together in one place. You don't have to learn a bunch of different systems. For example, if you're a data scientist, you learn one tech stack, and then once you've mastered that tech stack, then you can kind of navigate through any area of the business, and it makes you a lot more versatile. It makes the work a lot more efficient. So the exception to this is when there's a capability that you need that doesn't exist yet, and it's only needed by one team. So an example of this from Twitter was we had a data infrastructure team, and they had, back in those days, it was like Pig and Hive and things like that. And so there was a tech stack that we had to run MapReduce jobs and to schedule those. But we didn't have real-time data streams, and in fact, real-time data streams was kind of a new thing at that time. And this was the original Storm work that was done. That wasn't done within the data infrastructure team at Twitter, because that was needed for one particular product. That product, it was to show advertisers real-time feedback on how their promoted tweets were performing. That's the only reason that it was needed at that time. So that work was developed by the team that was building that analytics for advertisers product. Now, it turns out that real-time data streams are a really useful thing. And so eventually there were other teams that needed this kind of thing. And when you hit that point where you hit multiple use cases where the thing is going to be useful, then you should take a hard look at, are we going to get more efficiency here and make things a lot easier for everybody if we move that functionality into the data infrastructure group and then let the teams that need real-time data streams to just worry about the other parts of their product, and then they don't have to worry about setting up the streams. So then if you're thinking about insights, this is the one that actually becomes the most controversial. Like, there's a lot of big companies that have changed the way that they organize their insights groups. So for example, Facebook used to have a central team, and then they changed to a distributed, embedded kind of team. LinkedIn has done similar kinds of changes. They were similar kinds of changes that we did at Twitter. And so there's something here, because like it's really common that people struggle with this and are not happy with the organizational setup that they have for insights. I think that the fundamental problem comes in that there's two important aspects to insights. And one of those kind of intuitively points to a centralized team, and the other one points to a distributed team. So for the distributed one, let's imagine that you're a product manager working at a, so all my examples are in the context of consumer internet companies, because like that's all I've ever worked with, so forgive me if you don't work in that, but hopefully it carries over. So imagine you're a product manager and you're introducing a new feature. And one of the things that you're going to need to do, one of the many things, is make sure that your feature is properly instrumented, so you're collecting data. You want to define KPIs. You want to track those over time and understand how users are interacting with your new feature, and use that as feedback and input into your future product planning. So if you're that product manager, would you rather have an embedded, dedicated data analyst who you can give specific instructions to and who is going to care deeply about your feature because that's the only thing she or he works on? Or do you want to work with a central team where you have to get in line with everybody else and they're going to have a lot of things that they need to do and a lot of things they care about? And the way I'm setting this up kind of obviously points to the conclusion is, if you're that product manager, you want a dedicated analyst embedded in your team. Okay, so that's what I call the bottom-up aspect of insights, that you need people thinking deeply about specific areas of the product and specific areas of the business if you're going to be successful, because a central team is going to become a bottleneck. So now let's look at it from another angle. Let's say that for the company's next year's revenue target, you want to make sure the entire organization is aligned around a particular revenue target. Okay, well, in order to do that, you need to break down revenue into the core drivers. And so going back to my consumer web example, you're going to care about the things like revenue per user and active user growth and user engagement and all those kinds of things. You're going to need to understand these in pretty good detail in order to A, pick a reasonable target that is ambitious but still realistic enough that people don't get demotivated. And you're also going to want to manage different aspects of the business to this metric and hold them accountable for their contributions to it. In order to do that, you got to know, okay, if are we going to invest resources in improving revenue per user, or are we going to invest resources in just increasing the number of active users, or are we going to do both? You have to have a pretty sophisticated understanding of how user growth relates to revenue and what are the ways that you can most easily influence those drivers if you're going to do that in a reasonable way. Now, if you have an organization where all of the data analysts are embedded with different product teams, who's going to do that work? Probably nobody. So then you have a problem. You do need a central team if you're going to have this data-driven kind of approach to the way you manage a business. So the solution that I've found works the best is a mixture of both. So you do want a central team that's working on understanding at a deep level the drivers of the business and in particular user behavior in your product. And you also need people that are focused on specific teams and specific features and specific aspects of the business. So you have a central team and you have embedded people, but I am a big believer in having everybody part of a single organization, so that if you're embedded, you sit with a team and you're dedicated 100% of the time to that team, and that team's manager decides what your roadmap is. They decide what questions you're going to try to answer this quarter. But you have a manager who's part of the central group, and that keeps you in the loop in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of methodology. If you're really going to make a data-driven organization work where you understand the relationships between the metrics that all teams are driving towards, then you're going to have that connection with the central team. So it doesn't always have to be a reporting line. That's the way that I've done it, and it works well in my experience. But there's a lot of different ways to do it. But the point is that you do need to get this balance between distributed and centralized right in insights in particular. Now, for data products, it's a bit different. Usually a data product is developed for one particular use case, and so it can sit wherever in the organization that makes it easiest to do. Schibsted is actually a bad example of this because Schibsted has many products, and so everything that we do, it makes a lot of sense to do things in a more centralized way. But I think generally speaking, it makes a lot of sense to just wherever you find the use case, then have the team just, in an agile, lean kind of way, just get started and get something out the door. You often don't need the real machine learning AI kind of horsepower in the beginning anyways to get an MVP out. But when improving the sophistication of the algorithm gets very hard, when you find you need more expertise, when you find that the system that you're building shares a lot in common with similar kinds of data products and systems, then the balance starts to swing much more towards centralized teams. Okay, types of skill sets. I'll cover this one quickly because I'm probably taking up a good bit of time here. So for data infrastructure teams, obviously you're going to want engineers like back-end engineers and data warehousing kinds of people, like those kinds of skill sets generally. For insights, this is where, again, there's a little bit more complication. I find that it's helpful to have both data analysts and data scientists, and I draw a distinction between those two things. So data analysts, in my opinion, are people who are more likely to be embedded with products. Their career path is not as much on the increasing technical sophistication and impact of what you do on a technical level. It's increasing expertise in a particular product or business domain area. So you really understand this part of the product or this part of the business really well, and that's the kind of knowledge you can bring, and that's how you have a bigger impact over time. Data scientists, I find, well, in my definition anyways, they're much more technically oriented in that, so they're more likely to have an advanced degree, for one thing. They're more likely to be motivated by doing research that can be applied in several different product or business domains. So their career growth is going to be much more technically focused, and in doing things on the technical side that have leverage in many different parts of the product or the business. Then for data products, I'm a big believer in hybrids. So I look for data products, people who have software engineering and data science skills. And some of them have the title of data scientist, some of them have the title of software engineer, but the ideal hybrid is the kind of person who, if you didn't know their title, you wouldn't be able to figure it out really, because they can write code pretty well and they can also do the data science pretty well. If you get a group of those people together, almost always good things happen with respect to data products. Okay, so finally, development paths. That's the last aspect I'm going to cover here. So for data infrastructure, basically, you're going to find a basic set of needs that you need to fulfill. The idea is you want to get a minimum in place for each of those if you're starting from scratch. So you want, it truly is like a minimum viable product kind of thing. You want some kind of ability to collect the data and to schedule jobs and all that, and it's not going to be user-friendly, and the data scientists are going to complain, and they're not going to like it, but you're going to at least have the basic functionality in place. Once you have that running, once you actually have customers and users in the organization, then you start to understand where the real pain points are, and it helps you much better to direct your resources and focus to the areas that are most painful for your users. Before you get that out the door, I find that usually when you try to guess where the pain points are, you get it wrong. So it's best to get something in the hands of some customers first, and then you start to figure out these are the areas we should focus on. For, I'll cover insights last, but for data products, I find that you want a depth-first approach. So there's a lot of danger with data products. So for example, like recommendation systems and search and things like that, that you try to take on too many applications at once. I think it's really beneficial to focus on nailing one application and then showing that you can improve your metrics. So if you're trying to, for example, improve user engagement through recommendations, you should be able to show that you can actually sustain some improvement there, and only then take on additional use cases. That provides the focus that the team needs, and it also sets a tone for how are you going to actually innovate on the algorithmic side while you're also running a service, and it kind of forces you into showing that you can do that as a team before you add to the complexity. So finally, for insights, there's a specialized kind of development path that I think about: measure, understand, and manage. So in the first phase, you just want to measure as many things as you can that are going to be critical to the business. So you want to define KPIs, and you want to make sure that you have everything instrumented, and you want to make sure that you're collecting the data. The data is high quality. You can trust it. You can make dashboards and all that good stuff. The second phase is you want to build understanding. So the metrics are moving around. You want to understand why that is. So is it because of a competitor? Is it because of poor user retention in your product? Is it because of the economy slowing down in market X? So there's a lot of different things that could be influencing your metrics, and you have to go through an exercise of understanding them. That's the second phase. And then the third phase is where you can get into true data-driven business, where you're managing the business according to the data. So you understand why the metrics are moving the way they are. That allows you to forecast and set realistic targets, and then you can align the entire organization around them because you understand how what everybody in the organization is doing maps to a small number of overall business objectives. Okay, so just to summarize, these are the different components and some thoughts on how to set it all up. I do think that there's a lot of value in having one overall organization where all of these kinds of teams sit together because it allows for knowledge sharing. It allows for everybody to learn from everybody else. There's a lot of similarities between the work that each of these teams do. And so, there's good reasons to not do that sometimes, but whenever possible, I'm a big believer in having a unified data organization. So that's it for me. Thank you.